We're together today, and we're going to finish out a series entitled Shine. And if the students are joining us in this place today a little bit, we've kind of been talking about this verse that you probably know very well, where Jesus told us to let our light so shine that people could see how we live and glorify the God that's in heaven. Really what Jesus is inviting us to do is to live courageously for Him. You cannot be half-hearted and be a follower of Jesus Christ. If you want to follow Jesus, you're all in or you're not in at all. And what we tend to do, Jesus in fact said, I want you to live courageously in this culture. I want you to go into the workplace. I want you to go into your schools. And I want you to live courageously. Now, because we're human beings, we look at the things going on in our culture, and it can cause us fear and angst and anxiety. And instead of going into the culture, instead of influencing the culture, sometimes we want to pull back and retreat from the culture. Because we see things that disappoint us. We've seen them in the media this last week. We've seen things that discourage us, disappoint us, disgust us. And we just kind of want to wash our hands of the whole thing and say, Jesus, come and take me out of this mess. But Jesus said, look, I don't want you to retreat from the culture. I want you to penetrate the culture. I want you to influence the culture. I want you to change the culture. I want you to charge into the culture. In fact, I want you to be like salt that seasons the culture. And the great thing about this is that we don't need any special gifts or abilities to do this. We just need to go into our culture and love people. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. We just need to love people. Like loving Jesus is pretty easy. We can get that down. But the loving people part, that could be the challenge for us. And part of loving people is simply having compassion for people that need compassion. And then as we talked about last week, we tend to look at people and draw conclusions about them before we know their whole story. But Jesus said, listen to their story and understand where they came from, and it'll help you to love them. The challenge comes when we begin to live differently. So we say, all right, Pastor, I want to be all in. I want to be that one that shines in our culture. That's who I want to be. The challenge comes now that not everybody, maybe you've noticed this, not everybody is excited about Jesus the same way you are. And in fact, the closer you get to Jesus, the closer you emulate Jesus, the closer you become more like Jesus. Sometimes the culture that we live in likes us less and less. And the culture says, listen, I don't want to hear about your values. I want you to hear and know my values. I want you to bow down to my values. That's what culture says. I want you to compress into the mold of my values. I want you to compromise. You bow down to my values. I want you to fit in, or else you'll pay the price. And all of us in this room have felt that tension. And into that mindset, into the mindset where the culture around us says, fit in or else, Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 5, verse number 14. He says, you are the light of the world. You're like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. Today, I want to leave you with a sense of encouragement. I want you to know that every person in this room, regardless of your age, regardless of your race, regardless of your background, has the incredible ability to make an influential, powerful difference wherever you are. It doesn't matter if you're on the rig, if you're in the workplace, or if you're at school. I want you to know you have value and you can change and influence the world. You can do it. You can do it. Jesus believed it, and I believe it too. But as you well know, light exposes things that want to be hidden in the dark. You see, the culture that we live in doesn't want to hear about your values. They don't want to hear about your values on the unborn child and abortion. They don't want to hear about your values on politics. They don't want to hear about your values on social issues. They don't want to hear about your values when it comes to gender identity. They don't want to hear about your values when it comes to parenting. They don't want to hear about your values when you think we need to keep God in the Pledge of Allegiance. They don't want to hear about your values when you talk about prayer isn't just for the church, it's for the school place, it's for the workplace, it's for every place. Jesus said, you know what, in chapter 11 of that very same chapter that we just started, chapter 5, verse number 11, God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you, and they lie about you and say all sorts of things against you. Why? Because you're my followers. Because you're shedding light in those dark places. He goes on to say, and I don't know, I kind of have some maybe issues with Jesus in verse number 12 when he says, you need to be happy about it. Be very glad, for great is your reward that awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. Jesus said, not everybody's going to be so excited when you go out in the world and shine your light, but be really happy about it. Really, Jesus? I don't know. I just would really like everybody to be happy about Jesus and not fight the culture. There's a great story that I think illustrates exactly what Jesus was talking about right here. And if there's children in this place today, kids, you know this story. I could give you a microphone. You could come stand up here, and you could tell all the adults this story. You know it by heart. It involves really, there's 4 key players in this thing. 5, if you really want to get technical. There's a guy named Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the leader. He's the leader of the Babylonians. One of the 7 world wonders was there where Nebuchadnezzar built the Hanging Gardens. It was in a magnificent city. The man had incredible power. He's a leader now over the Babylonian Empire, and they have since exiled, they have taken into captivity the Jews. They went into Jerusalem, they went into Israel, and they took captive all the Israelites, and they brought back the brightest, the best, the most talented people to Babylon. They left the poorest of the poor back in Israel, back in Jerusalem, but all the best and the brightest. And amongst some of those Jews, there's 3 guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know this story, don't you? So we've got 4 key players in the story so far. There's Nebuchadnezzar, there's Shadrach, there's Meshach, there's Abednego, and there's one more. And we'll find out who that is as we go on with this story. And we're going to find out that these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, live in a culture that opposes a God culture. That Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are coming as light into a very dark culture. And I want you to know today that when you shine light in the world, when you shine light in the world, when you shine light in the world, Jesus shines bright through you. If you want to follow along in your Bible, I'll put the scriptures up here. Come on, kids, you know this story. It's found in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament part of your Bible, chapter 3, beginning in verse number 1. Look what it says. This king, Nebuchadnezzar, he made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. We would assume this was overlaid with gold. There was not enough gold in the ancient world mined for this to be solid gold. But I don't care, even if it was just overlaid with gold. How many know that if you have a statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, you'd like a piece of that action, wouldn't you? That'd be awesome. Now, here's what goes on, verse number 4. Then a herald shouted out, not the Williston Herald, some guy maybe named Harold, I don't know. He goes out into the countryside and he shouts. He says, people of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. All races, nations, and people. This is a universal message. This is the same thing that goes on in our culture today. A culture that says bend, suppress, compromise, bow to the values of the culture. All of you. It's the same message. Continues, verse number 5. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, do we have any band students? Raise your hand. Band students, raise your hand. Come on, up high, don't be ashamed. How many play the zither? Anybody in here? Just kind of wondering. All right, I don't know what that is. A lyre, a harp, the pipes, any other musical instrument. When you hear that sound, note this word with me, church. Bow, bow, bow to the ground and worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. I want you to bow. I want you to bend to this. Verse 6, look what happens. Anybody who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Well, next time they heard the orchestra play, what do you suppose the people did? And let me just tell you this. You feel the same tension. Mom and Dad, you feel the same thing. You think your kids just bow to, we'd say, peer pressure. I think it's friendship pressure. It's not peer pressure, it's friendship pressure. It's people that we value in our life. We value their opinion. And adults are no different. We value the opinion of others. And so sometimes when we need to speak out and speak up, we shut up. And all of us in this room feel that same tension when the culture presses in and opposes the culture of Jesus Christ. And when you don't bend to the pressure of friends, you can feel the pressure of your friends. It's why you start doing something that you don't want to do, that pressure. It's why you don't do the things that you want to do. It's because of the pressure of the culture that we live in. The story goes on, verse number 8. Look at this. But some astrologers, these are guys that are on the payroll for King Nebuchadnezzar, they went to the king, and I love this. I love the way this says it. They informed on the Jews. Can we just say it? They were tattletales, all right? Anybody got that brother or sister in your family? Don't raise your hand. You're going to start a whole fight here today, all right? So I'm not tattling. I'm informing on my brother or sister. That's what you say in that situation. So that's what they did. Verse number 12, look at the results. There are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you've put in charge in the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, king. They're not bending to the culture. They're not yielding to the culture. They're not paying attention to you. And you know, whatever gets your attention eventually gets your heart. And sometimes, you know what gets our heart? You know what gets us our attention? People's approval. People's approval of us means more than anything else. It might be your fear of people. It might be your interpersonal convictions. That's what you need to listen to. It might be your dignity, your personal values. Those are the things you need to listen to. But so often, the thing that we give attention to is the opinion, the popular opinion of the public around us. Verse 12. Your Majesty, here's what they do. They refuse to serve your gods, and they don't worship the gold statue that you've set up. King Nebuchadnezzar, as you keep reading the story, he calls in the three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he says, is this really true, guys? Look, I've got the band over here, and I've got you guys over here. I'm going to give you one more chance. Ready? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And they start playing the song. They didn't bow down. Look at the reaction in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves to you. Do you know why they didn't need to defend themselves to the king? Because they knew who defended them. They knew that there was a power greater than them that stood behind them and stood with them when the culture wanted them to bow down to the king, when the culture wanted it to bow down to the culture. They knew there was somebody bigger and greater than they were. Verse number 17, if we are thrown into that blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us, and he'll rescue us from your power, your majesty. And then I love this. Look at the moxie. This is they're just getting all bowed up here a little bit, verse number 18. But even if he doesn't, we want you to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods and worship your gold statue that you've set up. No compromise. I don't care if God doesn't step in. I'm going to stand up. I don't care if he doesn't step in. I'm going to stand up. Oh, if we could have the same kind of moxie, if we could have the same kind of inner convictions when we go out of this place into the world, into the workplace, into the classroom, into the hallways of your school. I don't care what happens to me. I know the God that I serve. I want to speak that into all of your lives today. You know, if you have ever compromised your values in order to feel value, you might not have any values. That's where we need to get close to Jesus Christ. I want you to know that you're valued by your God. And because you're valued by your God, you can overcome anything. Look at the way the king responds. This is awesome. Verse number 19. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. How many ever seen your mom's face distorted with rage? Anybody here? I know I've seen my mom's. I had a babysitter when I was a kid. She had like this growth right here. I don't know, it was a wart or was just this bump. And to me, it was like a thermometer or a barometer. I don't know. It was always up here when she was happy. When she was mad, it was down here. And I can still remember her shaking her hand and shaking my arm and looking, and I could just see this thing go down like that. Like her face was distorted with rage. I was always afraid when the bump went down, I was in trouble, you know. It was just an incredible thing. He commanded that that furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Let me tell you a little bit about this furnace. We think that it was shaped a little bit like a milk bottle or some sort of a bottle. It was large at one end and small at the other end. It was obviously big enough in diameter that you could stand up inside of this bottle-shaped furnace. At the small end, they would use that to feed the fuel into that furnace to make the fires burn. On each side of this bottle, they had ports or holes that they could stick a bellows in there. A bellows, you've maybe seen a bellows by a fireplace, and you pump it, and you pump air in there. I remember watching a blacksmith as he was blacksmithing, and he'd use a bellows to pump air into the fire and make that fire so hot. Well, they had ports on each side of this furnace. They could pump the air in there. More oxygen meant more flames. It meant more heat in there. Verse number 20, then the king orders that some of the strongest men of his army bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into that blazing furnace. Verse 21, so they tied them up, they threw them in the furnace fully dressed, and they had their pants on, their turban, their robes, and their outer garments. There's a reason that the writer puts the details in. These guys are fully clothed. I think the reason they put that detail in there is so that you could understand the power of God in this story. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, wanted to make certain that these guys burnt. Like, let's dress them in a little bit of kindling. We're going to make sure that these guys get in the furnace, they're going to burn. So just leave their clothes on them. Verse number 21. So they tied them up, they threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and outer garments. Guaranteed that burned. Verse number 22. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in that furnace, the flames killed the soldiers that threw the men into there. Come on, if you were going to clap and cheer, this is the part where you go, yeah, the bad guys are dying, right? If you were watching this on TV, you'd be like, yeah, because you're on the side of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Verse number 23. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. And there they died, but they stayed true to their convictions. And that's the end of our story. I used to read stories that way to my son. You know very well that's not the end of the story. That's just the beginning of the story. God wrote this story. And they're thrown into the large end of this milk bottle-shaped furnace. They're bound. And you can just see these guards that are up there, they're trying to stay far enough away that they don't burn because they can feel the heat. And they're like, okay, you got them, and they're hanging on to the bindings that are binding around. And so they got their hands around some ropes that are tying up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, on the count of 3. 1. And then one of the guards, do we let go on? I can never. Do we let go on 3, or is it 3 and then let go? I can never keep 2, you know? And then 3, and they let go, and they're burned. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown into the flames. And then I love how verse 24 says it. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar, he jumps up in amazement and exclaims, hey, didn't we tie him? Didn't we tie up these guys and throw them into the furnace? Didn't we tie up 3 guys? He says, yeah, we threw 3 guys in there. Look, he says in verse 25, I see 4 guys in there, and they're unbound, and they're walking around in the fire, unharmed. And the 4th one, he looks like a god. What's going on here? Don't you wish you could be there to watch this? I'm more excited about this than you are, I can tell. Verse number 26, then Nebuchadnezzar, he came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace because it's hot to him. He doesn't have this asbestos suit on like the other guys does. It's hot. And he starts to shout at them. He says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. Wouldn't you have loved to have been there? Come on, you guys come out of the furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, okay. Step out. How's it going? Can you imagine? You guys, if you're a Jesus follower, we're going to get to heaven one day, And there's all kinds of people in heaven I want to talk to. Are you with me on that one? I want to talk to some people. Come on, Adam, why didn't you swat the mosquitoes, right? Okay. Noah, why didn't you swat the mosquitoes? You had second chance on the whole thing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, tell me about the time that you got thrown into this blazing furnace. Verse 27. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors, they crowded around them. I bet they did. And look at the details. They saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their head was singed. Their clothing, the turbans, their clothing, none of it was singed, not even scorched. They didn't even smell like smoke. Isn't that awesome? I'm telling you, the provisions and the power and the protection of God are so complete and so thorough. He leaves nothing to guess. God will take care of you when you step into the blazing furnace of your school, when you step into the blazing furnace of your school, not your school only, but your workplace, and you go into the home and you go to unbelieving family members. I'm telling you, you make a stand for Jesus Christ, and Jesus will make a stand with you in that place. He's so thorough. He's so good. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, look at the results. Praise the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He said, his angel has rescued his servant who trusted in him. In the Old Testament part of the Bible, this fourth person that we see in the furnace there, remember we've got Nebuchadnezzar, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and then this fourth guy that's in the furnace that looks like an angel. We call that a theophany. This is an Old Testament type of Jesus that's standing in that furnace with those three guys there. God sends this angelic being in the form of Jesus Christ to be there with him. Verse 28 goes on to say, they defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than to serve and worship any other God except their own God. I want you to know something about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were just three men who stood against the culture. Three men who were all in with God. Three men who were true to their faith and convictions and values. Three men who knew that they lived in a dark culture, in a dark place. Three men who loved God more than they loved themselves. Three men who trusted God to come through. I'm telling you, when you decide to shine for Jesus, Jesus will shine through you. You make that decision. There's a reason this story's in the Bible. It's not in there just for your kids and for our children's pastor to tell on Sunday mornings. You are not one light alone, but you are one light amongst millions of others. And I love the way the story turns out. Look at it. These guys were already officials in Babylon. They were already officials in Babylon. They already had places of position and power in Babylon. But look at verse 29. Look what the king says. Because they took this stand, I'm going to make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, whatever they speak, if they speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into a heap of rubble. And there is no other God who can rescue like this. I'm telling you, when you make a stand for your convictions, when you make a stand for Jesus Christ, when you decide to go be the light of the world and shine in dark places, it has an effect on people who have dark places in their heart. It has an influence on them. It has an impact on them. When you stand up for Jesus Christ, Jesus stands up for you. It has a profound impact. And you might think, if I stand up for Jesus, I'm going to be the laughing stock of the whole world. But I'm telling you, when you take that place and you say, I'm going to shine, I don't care how dark it is with my family, I don't care how dark it is at school, I don't care how dark it is in the workplace, I'm telling you, Jesus stands with you, and you might be amazed at how Jesus makes somebody else stand with you in those places. Well, you know what our world wants to see right now? Our world wants to see superheroes. And I believe in you guys. I believe that you can be a superhero. To just shine wherever God places you. There's a reason that the whole Marvel series is just such a viral sensation right now. Our culture is looking for superheroes. I'm telling you, you plus Jesus standing up in the culture can be a superhero. Imagine how you'd feel. Imagine how you'd feel if the next time the culture says, fit in or else. You say, I'm not going to fit into your mold. I'm not going to fit into your culture. I'm going to stand up for my faith. I'm going to stand up for my Jesus. I'm going to be a light in this dark place. Imagine how you'd feel about yourself. Imagine if all 65 million born-again Christians in the United States of America decided to make a difference wherever they went to school, wherever they went to work, wherever they lived, if all 65 million Americans decided to live out their faith like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we would not be watching the things on our TV that we see today. We would not be frustrated by the political influences that we see today. We would not see our culture declining as we see it today. I'm telling you, we have the power to make a difference. We have the power combined together to be that light that makes a difference in the world that we live in. Imagine how you'd feel when God showed up in that moment and he made himself bigger than you ever imagined him to be. Imagine what blessings could follow when you begin to stand for your convictions and shine a light in those places. When you show compassion and you just show love and you just listen to the story of others. When you stand against the tide that stands against you. Look at the results of this. Look what happens. We're almost done. Verse number 30. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. They stood up to the culture. They stood up to the pressure. And when they did, everybody could see the good works of these three men. The king himself begins to glorify God, and then he elevates them to higher positions than they had before. Is it possible that when we stand up to the opposition, when we stand up in the culture, when we stand up to the culture, that somewhere in the culture, culture itself, and by the hand of God, raises us up to places that we have even more influence and shine even brighter? I think it's true. And so Jesus says again in Matthew chapter 5, verse number 16, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. You know how you do that? You just go live out your story. You just go live out your story. This is what your story is all about. You've got a story to tell. God has done something in your life. This is your story. It's not my story, it's your story. And you take your story, which becomes your light, and you start to live out your story and shine your light wherever you go. I thought about this a little bit. I thought, Jesus said, we're going to let our light shine. And if you say you, singular, you will be the light of the world. You will be the light to the world. If that's singular you, just you individually, you. Well, that can seem a little daunting. Because now you feel like it's like one against the world. But if I say to you, you, plural, all of you, or if you're in Texas, all you all, okay? Let your light shine. Suddenly, it doesn't seem so daunting, does it? Here's what we're going to do this morning. When your kids came through the door today, they should have received a little glow stick. If they didn't get one, I apologize. We'll try to get one to you. But kids, you got your glow stick. We just break your glow stick right now and start to make your glow stick glow. Come on, just do that, okay? Get your glow sticks glowing. Come on, kids, you're going to help me out. You're going to help Pastor preach the sermon today. You're going to help me preach a sermon. All right. Lighting crew, can you help me out today? Will you douse the lights today? Just douse the lights. Bring them all down. Kids, hold your lights up. There they are. You know what? Come on, there you go. You're the light. There it is. All of us together. All of us together. All of us together. We can bring our light to all the dark places of our world.